The Grand Hall of the Veilthar diplomatic station had witnessed 10,000 years of interstellar negotiations. Its ceiling stretched 40 meters high, carved from the bones of a dead star. At least that was what the Velthori claimed. Ambassador Zara Okonkwo-Briggs did not entirely believe them, but she had learned, in her 11 years of service to the United Earth Diplomatic Corps, to keep her skepticism contained behind a professional smile. She stood at the human delegation table, a modest rectangular slab of titanium alloy, deliberately understated compared to the bioluminescent thrones of the Velthori or the hovering obsidian discs preferred by the Scarith hegemony. Earth had learned early that ostentation in alien councils invited either envy or mockery. Neither was useful. Beside her stood Chief Science Liaison Dr. Emeka Torvalson, his silver-streaked locks tied back, his tablet open to a stream of live data from Earth's monitoring satellites. To her left sat Admiral Priya Nakashima Cole of the Earth Defense Strategic Command, in full dress uniform, medals gleaming, expression carved from glacial patience. The council session had been called by the Velthori Archspeaker, Sorvin the Resplendent, a title that Sorvin had apparently chosen himself, which told Zara everything she needed to know about his character. He was tall, iridescent, his 6 manipulator arms draped in robes of living silk that changed color with his mood. Currently they shimmered with condescending gold. "We have gathered," Sorvin announced in the harmonic galactic standard tongue, his voice resonating at frequencies that made Zara's teeth ache, to address the matter of the Outer Expansion Accords. Specifically, the petition filed by the Terran delegation to include humanity's new colony worlds in Sector 12 under the Accord's protection umbrella. Murmurs rippled through the assembled alien representatives. There were 19 species present. Most regarded the humans with varying degrees of disinterest. The Scarith delegate, a hulking crystalline being named Vrethashin, did not even look up from his meditation sphere. Zara rose. "Thank you, Archspeaker. Earth's position is straightforward. We have established 7 permanent settlements in Sector 12 over the past 14 years. These colonies represent nearly 2 million human lives. Under Article 7 of the Outer Expansion Accords, which humanity signed in good faith 40 years ago, new settlements established beyond the threshold line are entitled to diplomatic recognition and protection from armed aggression." She kept her voice steady. She had rehearsed this. She believed every word. Sorvin tilted his head. His robes flickered to a shade of amused amber. "Yes. Article 7. Fascinating that the Terrans invoke it." He paused, letting the silence do theatrical work. "Tell me, Ambassador Okonkwo-Briggs, in the 40 years since humanity signed the Accords, how many interstellar wars has Earth fought?" "None," Zara said. "How many times has Earth been called upon to contribute military forces to a council-sanctioned operation?" "3 times. We contributed each time." Sorvin turned to face the wider assembly. 3 times. "And how many of those contributions were deemed adequate?" The Velthori secondary consul, a female named Ilmathseret, made a sound that served as laughter among her species. Several other delegates followed suit. Even the usually stoic Silurian representative, Ambassador Vel Sunstride, a being of pure translucent energy housed in a crystalline shell, flickered in a way that Zara had learned meant amusement. Dr. Torvalson's hand found Zara's wrist under the table. A quiet warning. "Earth's contributions were within the parameters specified by the Accords," Zara said carefully. "Minimum parameters," Sorvin corrected cheerfully. "Always minimum. You humans are very precise about doing the least amount required." More laughter. "It is, I suppose, endearing. Like watching a young species learn to walk. One does not expect speed." Admiral Nakashima Cole had not moved. Her hands rested flat on the table. Her expression had not changed. But Zara, who had worked beside Priya for 6 years, noticed the infinitesimal tightening at the corners of her eyes. "The Terran petition," Sorvin continued, "is noted. The Council will deliberate. However, given humanity's limited strategic profile, we suggest the colonies in Sector 12 might better fall under Velthori Protectorate status. A provisional arrangement, naturally. Until Earth demonstrates the capacity for full-spectrum defense." The implication was clear. Surrender administrative control of 7 colonies, and 2 million humans, to the Velthori. In exchange for protection. It was extortion dressed in diplomatic silk. Zara opened her mouth. Emeka squeezed her wrist again harder. She closed it. Sorvin beamed with all 6 facial muscles he used for benevolence. "Shall we recess for consultation?" We understand humans require more time to process complex geopolitical arrangements. More laughter. This time, Admiral Nakashima Cole smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the kind of smile that, had the aliens understood human military history, would have ended the session immediately. That will not be necessary, Priya said, her first words of the entire session. Her voice was perfectly level, perfectly calm, perfectly final. We have everything we need. She stood, buttoned her jacket with precise, unhurried movements, and looked directly at Sorvin the Resplendent. Ambassador Okonkwo Briggs. Please transmit code Sirius to Earth Command. Zara's heart rate spiked. Code Sirius. She had been briefed on it once in a classified session 3 years ago, and had hoped she would never hear it spoken aloud. She transmitted it anyway. Because she trusted Priya. And because something in the laughter of 19 alien species had just crossed a line that no amount of diplomatic training could smooth over. The session did not reconvene. Humanity had already begun its response, not in words but in action. And the galaxy, entirely unprepared, would take 36 hours to understand what that meant. The Geneva orbital platform was Earth's nerve center, a vast ring structure in low orbit, housing the joint headquarters of the Earth Defense Strategic Command, the United Earth Diplomatic Corps and the Terran Economic Council. At any given moment, 3,000 personnel worked across its 12 sectors. On the morning after Code Sirius, every single one of them was awake. Director General Kofi Asante-Mensah stood at the center of the main operations floor, surrounded by holographic displays showing every human installation, treaty obligation, and diplomatic channel across known space. He was 64 years old, had spent 40 of those years in international and interstellar governance, and had been woken at 0300 hours by a priority transmission from Veilthar Station that he had read 4 times before he accepted it was real. "Where are we?" he asked. Commander Yuki Delacroix, his chief of operations, appeared at his side. She was 39, brilliant and chronically underslept. Withdrawal teams are in motion at all 14 joint installations. Our personnel from the Velthori resupply network are evacuating now, should be complete in 18 hours. The Scarith Research Partnership offices in Sector 4 are already dark. We've recalled our observers from the Silurian Boundary Commission. Economic ties? Finance team is working through the night. We have 47 active trade agreements. 22 can be terminated under standard withdrawal clauses with 30-day notice. 12 require mutual consent. Those are being flagged for legal review. The remaining 13 are complicated. Define complicated. Yuki pulled up a display. The Velthori have resource infrastructure we depend on for certain rare earth analogs used in quantum drive manufacturing. We import approximately 14% of our drive component materials through their supply chains. Asante-Mensah studied the numbers. Alternatives. Dr. Torvaldson's team has already been running projections. We have asteroid mining operations in sectors 9 and 11 that can be scaled up. It takes 18 months to reach full capacity. We'll have a gap. How bad a gap? 18 months of reduced deep space capability. No fleet expansion during that window. Existing ships maintain full operational status. It's new construction that slows. He nodded slowly. What about the colonies in Sector 12? Yuki's expression shifted, just fractionally. That's where it gets interesting, sir. She pulled up a new display. 7 dots scattered across a star map, each representing a human colony. Beside each dot, cascading data. Population, industrial capacity, defense installations, orbital infrastructure. In the 40 years since we signed the Outer Expansion Accords, Yuki said carefully, we have been technically prohibited from building heavy military installations on colony worlds beyond the threshold line. The Accords classify such installations as destabilizing. We respected that clause. I know we did. What we did not do, she continued, is stop building. We just built differently. She expanded the data feed for Colony 7, Kepler's Rest, population 280,000, situated on a habitable moon orbiting a gas giant. Kepler's Rest has a civilian deep space manufacturing complex. Registered as agricultural processing infrastructure. Asante-Mensah looked at her. It also, Yuki said, has 3 Mark 9 planetary defense arrays disguised as atmospheric regulators, a full-spectrum sensor grid integrated into the weather monitoring system, and an underground garrison facility rated for 12,000 troops. Along with enough material stored in the agricultural warehouses to outfit a full combat brigade. The Director General was quiet for a long moment. Who authorized this? Admiral Nakashima Cole's predecessor, Admiral Daisuke Ferreira-Obi. 15 years ago. It was classified at the highest level and flagged as contingency infrastructure. Yuki paused. All 7 Sector 12 colonies have equivalent installations. Some are more advanced than others. Colony 3, New Ibadan, has a shipyard that, on paper, repairs civilian transports. In reality, it can construct a destroyer-class vessel in 8 months. Asante Mensah sat down. Not because he was tired. Because he needed a moment to appreciate the scale of what he was looking at. For 40 years, Earth had been the quiet species. The one that never pushed. The one that met minimum requirements and smiled politely at condescension and accumulated power with the patience of people who had survived 2 world wars, a climate catastrophe, and 3 near-extinction events. They had learned, as a civilization, that the loudest person in the room was rarely the most dangerous one. "Put me through to Admiral Nakashima Cole," he said. Priya's face appeared on the display. She was aboard the INS Resolute, Earth's flagship, a vessel publicly classified as a diplomatic carrier. Her expression was the same as it had been in the council chamber. Calm, contained, absolutely certain. "Director General," she said. "Admiral. The council will respond to the withdrawal. They'll send envoys. They'll offer concessions. They may threaten." "Yes. What is your recommendation?" Priya considered this for exactly 2 seconds. "We don't negotiate from a posture of apology. The council mocked us in open session, on record, before 19 species. Every diplomatic channel in known space now has that footage. If we return to the table immediately, we confirm their assessment of us, that we absorb humiliation and come back for more. And if we don't return to the table? Then they have to come to us. On our terms." She paused. "I've already drafted a formal communication to all council member species. Not to the council itself, to each species individually. Informing them that Earth is suspending participation in all joint treaty frameworks, effective immediately, and that we welcome bilateral discussions with any nation that wishes to engage with us on the basis of mutual respect." The elegance of it hit Asante Mensah like cold water. Bypass the council entirely. Go species to species. Remove the Velthori stage management. Force every alien government to make an individual choice. Side with the mockers or talk to the humans directly. How many do you think will respond? Priya's expression shifted, something that, in another person, might have been the beginning of a smile. More than the Velthori expect. Asante Mensah looked at the 7 colony dots on the display. At the hidden garrisons. At the disguised shipyards. At 14% of their supply chain being cut and the contingency plans already in motion to replace it. Earth had not been sleeping. Earth had been preparing. "Send the communication," he said. Within 6 hours, 11 alien species had responded. Within 12, that number was 17. The Velthori, for the first time in recorded galactic history, found themselves without a quorum. Sorvin the Resplendent was not, by any honest accounting, a stupid being. He had governed the Velthori's external affairs for 60 years of their long lifespan, had navigated the absorption of 3 smaller species into their protectorate system, and had maintained the Velthori position as the dominant voice in the Galactic Council for 2 centuries. He understood power. He understood leverage. He understood, above all, the value of theater. What he had not understood, what none of them had understood, was humans. He sat now in his private chamber, surrounded by his senior advisors. Ilmeth Sarat, who had laughed in the council chamber and was now very carefully not meeting his eyes. Tactical Consul Drenvorith, a scarred veteran of 3 border conflicts. And the intelligence specialist Quel Mareth, whose network of informants spanned 40 star systems. On the display before them, Earth's bilateral communication to 17 separate species. And the responses. 17, Sorvin said. The word landed like a stone. 17 formal acknowledgements, Quel Mareth confirmed. 9 have already agreed to preliminary bilateral talks. The Celerian have accepted an invitation to visit Kepler's Rest, the human colony in Sector 12. The Thren Collective sent a trade envoy to Earth within 4 hours of receiving the communication. The Thren, Ilmeth Sarat said slowly, were among those who laughed. Yes, Quel Mareth said. Apparently they find practicality funnier than mockery. Drenvorith had not spoken yet. He was studying a different display, tactical data, not diplomatic. The colonies, he said. Quel, did we have accurate intelligence on the Sector 12 installations? Quel Mareth was quiet for precisely long enough to communicate that the answer was uncomfortable. Our intelligence indicated civilian infrastructure. Agricultural, manufacturing, basic transport. And the revised assessment? Another pause. The new Ibadan shipyard appears to have launched a vessel we did not predict. Our observation posts in the sector logged its departure 12 hours ago. Based on drive signature and hull profile. Quelmereth brought up the image. It was not a civilian transport. The vessel was 800 meters long, angular, built with the brutal efficiency that characterized human military design. No aesthetic flourishes, no decorative structures, every surface angle calculated for either deflection or weapons placement. It carried a designation along its hull, Inus Consequence. When was that ship constructed? Sorvin asked quietly. Our best estimate is 3 years. In a facility we classified as a transport repair dock. Drenvorith made a sound that his species used for professional respect combined with alarm. They built a destroyer in a civilian shipyard in 3 years without us knowing. That appears to be accurate. How many of those shipyards do they have? Quelmereth pulled up the updated analysis. The number was not small. Sorvin stood and walked to the window of his chamber, looking out over the luminescent spires of his homeworld. He had been born in those spires. He had ruled from this chamber for 60 years. He had, on more occasions than he could count, looked out at this view after a successful maneuver and felt the warm satisfaction of a species that sat atop the known order of things. He did not feel that now. We laughed at them, he said. Not to anyone in particular. Just to the air. Arch speaker. In open session. On record. Before 19 species. He turned. His robes, responding to his emotional state, had shifted to a color his advisors had not seen on him before. A deep, muted gray-violet. We have dealt with many young species. The Thren, when they first joined the Council, were terrified of us. The Scarth came to us seeking trade and deference. Every species we have encountered has understood that the Velthori are the senior power and has adjusted their behavior accordingly. He paused. The humans did not. They signed the accords, Ilmeth Sarat offered. They signed the accords. They met every minimum requirement. They smiled at our condescension. They absorbed every slight. For 40 years. His voice was very even. And they spent those 40 years building. Quietly. Without announcement. Without posturing. And then, the moment we publicly humiliated them, they did not protest. They did not negotiate. They simply... He gestured at the displays. And took 17 species with them before we had time to respond. Drenvorith cleared his throat. What are our options? Military pressure on the Sector 12 colonies is no longer viable, not without intelligence on those installations which we clearly don't have. Quelmereth's tone was precise and unhappy. Economic leverage is compromised. They have already begun scaling alternative supply chains, and 7 of our trading partners are apparently in bilateral discussions with Earth. Diplomatic pressure requires a council quorum, which we cannot achieve without at least 4 of the species currently engaged with the Terran bilateral process. Sorvin returned to his seat. Draft a communication to the Terran Director General. Not through the council. Directly. Ilmeth Sarat blinked. That would be an acknowledgement. That we miscalculated. Yes. His robes cycled through several colors before settling on something approaching humility, a shade his species called Velmern, the color of water that has been still for a long time and is about to move. We did miscalculate. There is no point in pretending otherwise. The question is whether we can recover from it. He looked at Drenvorith. That ship, the Inus Consequence, where is it now? The tactical consul checked. It has taken up a position at the edge of the Sector 12 boundary. It is not moving. Not transmitting. Not threatening. Pause. It is simply present. Sorvin absorbed this. A ship called Consequence sitting at the border of the colonies they had tried to take, doing nothing but existing. The humans, he was beginning to understand, had a very particular sense of communication. Ambassador Vel Sunstride of the Silurian Radiance had traveled for 19 hours to reach Kepler's Rest, and the journey had given them considerable time to think. The Silurian were among the oldest spacefaring species in the known galaxy. Their civilization predated the Velthori by 800 years, predated humanity by 4,000. They had seen young species rise and fall, had watched empires burn and coalitions form and shatter. They had, over those 4 millennia, developed what they privately considered an excellent ability to recognize pivotal moments. They were fairly certain this was one. The surface of Kepler's Rest greeted Vel Sunstride with a landscape of extraordinary agricultural richness, rolling fields of engineered grain stretching to the horizon, punctuated by clusters of low, practical buildings and occasionally, the angular geometric shapes of large atmospheric processing installations. At least, that was what the official records called them. Governor Adise Mbeki Christensen met the Silurian envoy personally on the landing platform. She was 47, broad-shouldered, with the unhurried confidence of someone who had governed 280,000 people through 3 emergencies and a near-catastrophic atmospheric processor failure, and had not lost anyone in any of them. She was wearing work clothes. Not diplomatic attire. Work clothes with dust on the boots. "Ambassador Sunstride," she said. "Welcome to Kepler's Rest. We're glad you came." The Silurian's crystalline shell flickered appreciation. "Governor Mbeki Christensen, thank you for the invitation. I confess I was curious. About the colony? About many things." Vel Sunstride looked out over the landscape. "The atmospheric regulators are very tall." Governor Mbeki Christensen smiled. "They need to be. The moon's natural atmospheric pressure fluctuates significantly during the gas giant's storm seasons. We built the arrays oversized to compensate. Naturally. Pause. Governor, I should be direct with you. The Silurian radiance was present in the council chamber when Archspeaker Sorvin made his remarks about humanity. I know. We did not object. I know that too." Vel Sunstride flickered, a complex, layered pattern that carried several meanings simultaneously, which was characteristic of Silurian communication. "That was a failure of judgment on our part. The remarks were inappropriate. We prioritized our relationship with the Velthori over the dignity of your species, and that was wrong." Pause. "I am saying this to you directly as your guest because I believe it needs to be said." Governor Mbeki Christensen looked at the ambassador for a long moment. Then she said, "Would you like to see the colony? Not the official tour. The actual colony." They spent 4 hours walking Kepler's Rest. Not the administrative center, not the showcase facilities, the actual working infrastructure. The grain processing complexes where third-generation colonists, born on this moon, talked about soil microbe optimization as casually as they talked about weather. The school complex where children learned mathematics and history and xenobiology side by side, because on a colony world, every child needed to understand the universe they were part of. The medical center that handled everything from mining injuries to births, and there had been 11,000 births on Kepler's Rest in the past decade. 11,000 humans born on a moon that had no name 40 years ago. At one point, they passed through what the colony records described as a material storage facility. Vel Sunstride, whose perception extended into electromagnetic spectra invisible to human eyes, noticed certain things about the facility that the records did not describe. They said nothing. The governor said nothing. Both understood that the silence was its own form of communication. "You have been building this for 40 years, Vel Sunstride said as they stood at the edge of a residential district, watching children play in a park that was, by any measure, simply a park, grass, climbing structures, a fountain made from local stone. Not just the military capacity. All of it. All of it, Governor Mbeki Christensen confirmed. We lost 80 billion people in the 21st century. Between the wars and the climate collapse and the resource conflicts, we nearly lost everything." She watched the children. "When we got to space, we made a decision as a species. We were never going to be in that position again, where our survival depended on someone else's generosity or good intentions. So you built quietly. We built honestly. The Accords prohibited offensive installations. We didn't build offensive installations. We built depth." She paused. "We also spent those 40 years studying the Council, understanding how it worked, which species genuinely wanted stability and which ones used the language of stability to maintain dominance. And what did you conclude? That most species in the Council are pragmatic. They're not hostile to us, they just follow the path of least resistance, which usually led through the Velthori. Our job now is to make a different path easier." She finally looked directly at Vel Sunstride. "That's why we invited you here first. Not because you're the most powerful. Because you're the most honest. We thought you'd want to see the truth." Vel Sunstride was quiet for a long time. In Silurian culture, extended silence from an elder diplomat carried the weight of deep deliberation. "What do you want from us?" the ambassador finally asked. "Nothing you're not willing to give," Mbeki Christensen said. "We're not replacing the Council. We're not interested in domination. We want a network of bilateral relationships built on actual mutual benefit. We want Sector 12 recognized as sovereign human territory. We want to be treated as equals." "And if the Velthori object?" The governor smiled, not the professional smile of diplomacy but the real one underneath. Ambassador, the Velthori have never seen what happens when humanity objects to something. We have. We'd prefer they learn from history rather than experience. Vel Sunstride's crystalline shell blazed with sudden light, the Silurian equivalent of understanding arriving all at once. The 40 years? You were not being patient because you were weak. No. You were patient because you were not ready. Yes. And now? Governor Adiz Mbeki Christensen looked up at the sky of Kepler's Rest, the vast orange arc of the gas giant hanging above the horizon, the stars sharp and clear beyond it, the distant point of light that was the INS Consequence holding its silent position at the sector boundary. Now, she said, we're ready? Within 24 hours, the Silurian Radiance formally recognized Sector 12 as sovereign human territory. They were the first. They were not the last. The city of New Ibadan had been named by its founders, first-generation colonists from West Africa, Southeast Asia, Brazil, and Norway, who had mixed their naming traditions in the way that colony worlds do, practically and without sentimentality. It sat on a plateau overlooking a vast freshwater sea, its skyline a mixture of utilitarian colonial architecture and newer buildings that bore the confident, sweeping aesthetic of a civilization that had begun to think of this place as permanent. The summit hall had been constructed in 11 days. Not because 11 days was impressive, though it was, but because when 14 species agreed to attend your diplomatic summit on 30 days' notice, and the alternative venue was a Velthori-controlled station, you built what you needed and you built it fast. Zara Okonkwo Briggs stood at the podium of that hall and looked out at representatives of 14 species. Not the Velthori. Not yet. They had sent a communication requesting to attend as observers. The human delegation had declined, politely, and noted that observer status would be available once the bilateral framework was established. The Velthori were unaccustomed to being told they could wait. They were learning. The Scarith were present. Vrethashian, who had ignored everything in the council chamber, had personally requested attendance and arrived early. He had also, upon landing, presented Governor Mbeki Christensen with a Scarith honor crystal, a gesture that in his culture was reserved for beings whose intelligence had been demonstrated under adversity. The governor had accepted it graciously and put it in her office window where it caught the light. The Thren Collective had sent 3 representatives, which was unusual. They typically sent 1. Zara took this as a signal of serious intent. Dr. Emeka Thorvaldsen was not at the diplomatic table. He was in the Summit Hall's secondary conference room, in a technical session with xenobiologists and engineers from 6 species, discussing mutual research frameworks. He had been there since dawn and had twice forgotten to eat. His tablet showed 12 concurrent scientific exchanges, questions about quantum drive optimization, ecological restoration, atmospheric engineering. The scientists, freed from the political theater of the council, had apparently been waiting to talk to each other for quite some time. Admiral Nakashima Cole was not in the summit hall either. She was aboard the INS Resolute, orbiting Kepler's Rest with a task force that publicly served as the summit's security detail. No one asked too many questions about the task force's composition. No one tried anything that would require the questions to be answered. Zara began. 30 days ago, she said, Earth withdrew from the Galactic Council. We did so not in anger, though there was anger, but in recognition of a fundamental truth that 40 years of patient participation had made clear. The Council, as constituted, does not serve the interests of all its members equally. It serves the interests of those with the most power to shape its proceedings. She paused. Let that sit. We are not here to destroy the Council. We are not here to build a rival power structure or to position humanity as the new dominant species. We don't want dominance. We want, and this is not a complicated concept, to be treated as equals. She looked around the room. Each of you came here because you also understand something. That a system where one species sets the rules for all others is not stable. It is merely stable appearing. And stable appearing systems have a way of failing at the worst possible moments. She outlined the framework. Bilateral trade agreements, each negotiated independently, on terms that both parties found genuinely beneficial, not terms extracted under the implicit threat of Velthori disapproval. A mutual defense clause that was voluntary and specific, not the vague minimum contribution language that the Accords had used to extract resources while providing nothing. A scientific exchange program with no political preconditions. Recognition of each species' sovereign territory, including humanity's Sector 12 colonies. It was, in other words, everything the Accords had promised and never delivered. The deliberations lasted 9 days. There were real disputes, The Thren Collective and the Silurian had a long-standing disagreement about navigational rights in a shared border region that had nothing to do with Earth, but that the summit, unexpectedly, gave them a neutral forum to address. The Scarith wanted specific protections for crystalline form life that existing frameworks didn't recognize. A species called the Miruin, attending their first major interstellar summit, needed 4 patient hours of explanation before they understood the trade clause format. Zara negotiated all of it. She slept 4 hours a night for 9 days. She ate at the table. She learned halfway through day 6 that Archspeaker Sorvin had sent a private communication to Director General Asante Mensa. Not an apology exactly, but an acknowledgement that the council session had been unproductive, and a request for normalized dialogue. Asante Mensa had responded that Earth would be happy to discuss normalized dialogue once the new Ibadan Accords were signed, and that the Velthori were welcome to join the bilateral framework on the same terms as any other species. No special status. No presiding authority. Equal terms. The communication back from the Velthori had taken 6 hours. This was, for a species that typically responded to any perceived slight with immediate and elaborate countermaneuvering, practically geological in its restraint. When the response came, it was 4 words in Galactic Standard: "We will consider this." On the 9th day, 13 of the 14 attending species signed the new Ibadan Accords. The 14th, a reclusive species called the Velsharith, who communicated exclusively through color patterns and had needed additional time to consult with their homeworld, signed 48 hours later, via a transmission that Emika Torvalson described as the most beautiful diplomatic document I've ever seen, because it was literally a pattern of colors. Zara stood in the summit hall after the final signing, when most of the delegates had dispersed to their ships or to the colony's guest quarters. Governor Mbeki Christensen stood beside her, looking at the signed documents displayed on the main screen. 40 years, the governor said. 40 years, Zara agreed. Do you think they understand yet? The Velthori. What they were actually looking at. Zara considered this. They thought they were looking at a young species that needed protection. An obliging minor power, useful for minimum contributions and not much else. She paused. What they were actually looking at was a species that had survived everything its own history threw at it. Wars, plagues, climate collapse, near extinction. 3 times. And come out the other side not broken but educated. She looked at the sign names on the display, 14 species represented in 14 different written forms. We learned something surviving all of that. We learned that the loudest person in the room is rarely the most prepared. And we learned that the most dangerous thing you can do to a species that has been to the edge of extinction is underestimate it. Governor Mbeki Christensen nodded slowly. The Velthori will join eventually. Probably. On our terms. Yes. Outside the summit hall, the orange arc of the gas giant was rising. 11,000 Kepler's Resh children, born on this moon, citizens of a colony that the Velthori had tried to absorb as a protectorate 30 days ago, were waking up to a morning that was, in every measurable way, different from the morning before it. Dr. Torvalson would spend the next decade cataloging what the new Ibadan Accords produced. 17 joint research breakthroughs in the first 3 years, for new shipping routes that reduced transit times across Sector 12 by 30%, a xenobiological exchange program that identified a cure for a Thren respiratory condition using a compound found in Kepler's rest soil. Real outcomes. Practical benefits. The kind of cooperation that happens between equals who have decided to trust each other. Admiral Nakashima Cole would later write in her memoirs that the most important thing humanity had done in its first century of space travel was not build the INS Consequence or design the hidden garrisons or develop the covert shipyards. The most important thing, she wrote, was the decision, made collectively, quietly, without announcement, to refuse to become the kind of civilization that gained power by diminishing others. The council chamber on Vailthar Station remained operational. Some species still used it for routine coordination. But increasingly, the real decisions of the galaxy were made in smaller rooms, at bilateral tables, between species that had chosen each other freely. Sorvin the Resplendent sent one final communication to Zara, personally, 6 months after the summit. It contained no title. No formalities. Just a sentence in plain Galactic Standard: "We did not know who you were." Zara read it twice. Then she replied in 3 words, "Now you do." She sent it, closed the communication and went back to work. There were always more worlds to speak for. More species to meet at equal tables. More mornings on colony moons where children born in the stars had never known a universe in which their species was considered anything less than remarkable. Humanity had ended its treaties with the Council. And in doing so it had finally, properly, permanently, begun.